Monday's my day off. I'm not getting paid to be here, so I'm doing this as a volunteer firefighter, right? No. So I'm doing this because I care, okay? My hope is that nothing in your life gets as extreme and crazy as Michael's life, and that's why I'm here. I taught in the School of Medicine. I taught residents at St. Louis University, and how I got their attention. I said, if someone comes to you with stage 4 cancer, stage 4 heart disease, can you turn that around? Now, stage 1 cancer, stage 1 heart disease, you got a good shot. And it's the same thing with behavioral health. You know, stage 1 depression versus suicidal stage 4 depression. We're not miracle workers, just as your oncologists, as much as they want to cure stage 4 cancer, it's really, really difficult, okay? So I'm here to make sure that there's no stigma around early help, to getting early help, okay? And I'm doing this as a volunteer, okay? A little bit about my background. I had a philosophy degree, the first one in my family to go away to college. I grew up in rural Illinois. My dad owned a tavern. My mom was a homemaker. I'm the oldest of 8 kids. My mom and dad both have 8th grade education, but I got a philosophy degree, which is another whole story. And what do you do with a philosophy degree? You become an EMT. So my first job out of college was in the hospital. So I worked, never rode the ambulance. So for 2 years I did that. I really found it rewarding, so I took the behavioral health route and got my master's in social work. My first job was on a leukemia floor on the bone marrow transplant unit, which is stage 4 cancers. So I saw a lot of traumatic deaths, a lot of young people. And during that time, I studied and passed my boards to become a licensed therapist. I was then trained in Washington, D.C. to be a first responder to workplace trauma, workplace violence. I worked for Personal Performance Consultants, and we served AT&T, FedEx, Ameren UE, Eveready Battery, Ralston President. We had quite an array of companies and corporations. And my job was to travel the Midwest, going east, whenever there was a tornado, a flood, a bank robbery, a homicide, a suicide, serial killings. My job was to go on site and stable the workplace. My office was downtown. So when there was an Ameren UE employee, Eveready Battery employee, I think one of my biggest responses during that time was Eveready Battery plant, and it's public knowledge in Vermont. One of the employees came in and killed the plant manager and 3 other employees and then set the place on fire. So I spent a week in Vermont just trying to stabilize the workplace. During that time, St. Louis University asked me to teach crisis intervention in the School of Social Work. So I did that for quite a while, and I really enjoyed teaching. And the dean says, why don't you get your PhD? I go, that's out of my scope. She goes, I think you can do it. Study trauma recovery. You've got so much clinical experience, emergency room, first responder. So I chose New York in 2001 to study trauma recovery. 10 days later, 9/11 happened. The dean there knew my interests in research, so I spent my first semester at Ground Zero working with people in the neighboring towers who saw people jumping out of 80-story buildings. So I didn't work with survivors of the 2 towers, nor with the fire department, but with people in the neighboring towers. And that was my first publication. I wrote up my experience and my model, and I started my academic career. I got hired at St. Louis University as an associate dean for the whole university, teaching in the social work program. Fast forward 10 years, and my whole life changed. I thought I was going to be in academia the rest of my life, and in fact, tomorrow's the anniversary of his suicide. My beautiful nephew died by suicide. And that really threw me into a tizzy, because here I am, an expert, doing all this wonderful work, and I can't even help my nephew. My sister, she's the oldest, we're the 2 oldest of 8 kids, and we're really, really tight. So her pain, my pain, the family pain. So I decided I didn't want to stay in academia anymore. I knew if I wanted to heal, I needed to do some work. So I became clinical director at a suicide prevention center, working day in and day out with families whose husband, son, daughter was suicidal. I then wrote a grant with the School of Medicine at SLU, and for 5 years I taught physicians their role in early detection. I just got off the phone with a physician. Together we have a client. He had a full scholarship, straight A, high school. He hasn't left his home for 2 years. So the doctor referred him to me. I've got a reputation working with suicide and very difficult clients. So I called the doctor because he called me, and we're both baffled about this young kid. Where's his trauma that, because he was a high-functioning high schooler. But he came home from college, and we're both trying to help him. So I found that working with families that had suicidal members, it really healed me, because now I was giving back, and I wanted to help families not go through what my family went through. And it's 18 years ago. My sister and I talked this morning. 18 years ago tomorrow that Justin died. And it took a long time to heal from that. But I'm here because I care. I'm not getting paid to do this. Monday's my day off. And I hope in some way, and my brother-in-law, 70-year-old tough guy, sat on chest pains for 2 months, wouldn't tell anybody. Right now, he's under the knife with quadruple open surgery. The doctor said, I can't believe you're alive. This was on Thursday. Friday, he had a really bad episode. He was too weak to have surgery, so he went into surgery today. So like most of us, he sat with his symptoms. And hopefully he'll be okay, come out of surgery this afternoon. So it's very common for us to fix it ourselves. It's very common. And most of us do a pretty good job of fixing ourselves. But there comes a tipping point when we need a physician, we need a pastor, we need a good friend, we need a social worker, we need a therapist to get us over that. I call it the antibiotic. We try like hell to get over the sinus infection, the cold, whatever. We really try hard, and then finally we give in, and the doctor says, I'll get you through this. I'll give you an antibiotic, a Z-Pack. And sure enough, it works. That's my attitude towards seeking help for depression or anxiety. Sometimes we just need a little boost, just to get over the hill, just some outside help. But most of the time, we can do it on our own. So I do have an office in Kirkwood. So currently, I have a practice. I left the Suicide Prevention Center 5 or 6 years ago to start my own practice. I wanted to be my own boss. I grew up with my grandfather's dairy farm and my father running a bar, and both of them were models for self-employment. So finally I get to be my own boss. So that's what I've been doing. How about reading this?
What matters? Do not believe that sheer suffering teachers of suffering alone taught all the world would be wise. Since everyone suffers, to suffer must be added. Warming, understanding, patience, love, openness, and the willingness to remain valuable.
Thank you. So all of us suffer. All of us can get sad, anxious. Sometimes we need something added to get us over that hump. If you have, I'm not going to show it today because we only have 45 minutes, but 60 Minutes in September of 2024 interviewed current firefighters whose dads died in 9/11. It's really powerful. Why would you become a firefighter when your dad died in 9/11? It's really inspiring interviews with these current firefighters today. You can Google it. the September 11th episode of 60 Minutes. So what we're going to do together is, what's the difference between a cold and pneumonia? Is there a difference? You need a doctor if you got pneumonia. You don't if you have a cold. So what's the difference between stress and trauma? We're going to look at a physical, emotional, social, and spiritual approach to healing, to staying healthy. And what are the characteristics that enhance resilience, keeping us strong? And what are some skills and strategies, okay? So, first of all, we're going to identify our terms. What do we mean when we say trauma? So if a colleague, a firefighter comes up to you and goes, oh my God, I'm really traumatized. Another firefighter comes up to you and says, I'm really stressed out. Are they telling you two different things? Or are they both saying the same? And what does it mean to be healthy and resilient? Our first point of information is we cannot think in binary terms. Either I'm depressed or I'm not depressed. Either I'm traumatized or I'm not. Either I'm healthy or I'm not healthy. All of us are on a continuum. We're all on a continuum. Mild, moderate, severe. So don't think of either I'm healthy or I'm not. Either I'm traumatized or I'm not. I always told my students, I taught for 25 years at St. Louis University School of Social Work, I said, don't ever document your client is frail. Because there's one area of their life that they're strong. There's always one area that a client is strong. Nobody is totally frail. So if you went to your pastor and said, am I healthy? How would your pastor answer that question? If you went to your doctor, am I healthy? If you went to your spouse, your adolescent son, my best friend, I was best man in his wedding, from Hungary. His wedding was in Venice, Italy. It was great. He's a pathologist, works with leukemia, childhood leukemia. His definition of health is under a microscope. He determines if somebody's healthy or not by looking through a microscope. So, your pastor, your physician, firefighters, how do you define someone as healthy? Would your physician define health the same way that a firefighter would? The law says, like if you apply for disability, the law has criteria to determine if you're too unhealthy to work. Very different criteria from mine, but they have a set of criteria. Your family, like I just said, if you ask your family, am I emotionally healthy? How would your kids answer that? How would your spouse, etc.? And how do you answer that? So, a simple definition of stress. We're going to define stress and trauma. Any physical, emotional, social, spiritual reaction to change. The first thing I ask my clients who come in and say, I'm so stressed out, I'll say, well, how much change is going on in your life? Oh, my grandfather died, who I was taking care of. My youngest, we're having an empty nest. My youngest daughter's going away to college. My wife was diagnosed with breast cancer. That's a lot of change. So they're living with a lot of stress. So how much change is going in your life will determine how much stress you're under. And you folks are very good at managing change. That's why you don't have a desk job. It would drive you crazy a bit, right? Doing the same thing every day from 9 to 5. But this doesn't drive you crazy, being a firefighter. People look at you and say, why do you do this? Because you know how to manage change. You come into work expecting to have a different day than yesterday. When I worked as an EMT, when I was a first responder, I found it very fulfilling not knowing what was going to happen today at work. I couldn't do the same thing every day. It's just not who I am. Maybe because I'm the oldest of 8, I was constantly putting out fires. But I don't like doing the same thing every day. So how do you physically react to change? How do you emotionally, socially, and spiritually? Trauma, on the other hand, this is very, very important. How unexpected is the change? You remember Darcy Advertising Company? They had the Cardinals and Busch Stadium as their client. They were a marketing advertising company. They were one of my clients downtown. They called me, got to get here right away. Their 55-year-old receptionist was lying in the reception area dead from a heart attack. And people were freaking out. Because this was a marketing, high-rise downtown office. They weren't expecting to step over a dead body. You might expect that this afternoon yet.
It's easy now.
Okay, okay. Are firefighters superstitious? Oh, very? As much as baseball players. Worse? But you see something, so it's not the dead body that makes it traumatic. People say, how do you do your work? How do you pull a dead body out of a car that's on fire? Not too many people have done that in their life. It's expected of you. You're trained to do that. So we're moving into trauma when the event is unexpected. So when I held the hand of my 96-year-old grandma, the dairy farmer's wife, she was my favorite person. I was her favorite grandson out of 36 grandchildren. I was always out on the farm. But when I held her hand and she died, it was not traumatic. It was sad. When I got the phone call, go to St. Louis University Hospital emergency room because Justin is being helicoptered there, that was traumatic. Highly unexpected. You see the difference? The second criteria, it threatens us physically, emotionally, socially, or spiritually. Thirdly, it attacks our identity. So if you got fired as a firefighter, it would be traumatic. Because firefighting is not just a profession, it's who you are. You never stop being a firefighter. And so if you got fired, that would be traumatic. Because it's unexpected and it attacks your identity. A flat tire is stressful on Interstate 44, but it doesn't attack who you are as a person. When I was on that leukemia floor, a 19-year-old boy died of leukemia, the only son of this couple. And by this time, they were too old to have more children. And I remember after they sat with the body, they came out into the hallway and said, who are we now that we are no longer parents? You see the difference between trauma and stress? So think about what attacks your identity. So for some people, divorce is traumatic. For the person who doesn't want the divorce, my identity is being your spouse. And you're walking out, and you betrayed me, and you're walking out on me. I never expected you to be unfaithful. I expected until death do us part. WTF? So for some people, divorce is a relief. It's expected. Thank God, she's gone. And for other people, it's traumatic because of these criteria. And fourthly, it challenges what's meaningful to us. A flat tire, not paying our water bill, isn't all that meaningful. But when your kid, your 8-year-old, gets a diagnosis of cancer, and that child is very meaningful to you, being a parent, do you see how we're entering the realm of trauma now versus stressful? And lastly, and that's why flooding, tornadoes, war are really traumatic, because, man, is this going to happen to me again? So, are you beginning to see the distinction? And there's overlap between stress and trauma. Stress can look like trauma. Trauma can, there's some overlap. It's not binary. Either you're stressed out or you're trauma. But mild trauma can look like severe stress. There's some overlap. So why am I telling you this? It's important to know what you're dealing with. The captain says, what kind of fire are we dealing with? Is it in the rafters? Is it in the basement? We got to know what we're dealing with before we go crashing into there, right? Same thing with are you dealing with stress? Are you dealing with trauma? You got to know what you're dealing with to be effective in managing it. Not every fire is the same. And so too with trauma and stress. When there was this is 20 years ago when it was still Mercantile Bank, a lady was walking to her, employee at Mercantile was walking to her car. She got held up, shot and killed. And the HR person said, can you come in tomorrow and meet with her coworkers? Let's just meet with the 3 people that she worked with. I said, no, why don't you just send out an invitation who would ever like to come? Well, 30 people showed up. Because all of a sudden, am I going to be safe walking home? This potential, even though they didn't directly know the lady, it was what we call vicarious trauma. How safe am I going to be leaving work? So stress and trauma are on a continuum. At one end are events that we expect, stressful crap, bring a lot of change is manageable, and it doesn't threaten us. On the other extreme end are unexpected events that bring a lot of change, that's life-threatening. And like a sinus infection, I just can't manage it. Hey doc, can you order me a Z-Pack? This is bigger than me. I've worked with the symptoms for 5 days. It's time for an antibiotic. So, understand how much change is going on in your life today, July 21st. How much change is going on in your life? Are you coasting right now? Or do you have a lot of change? If you have a lot of change, you're dealing with a lot of stress. How much of this change is unexpected and is threatening your identity? If we treat pneumonia, if it's a cold, we wind up in ICU. Like my brother-in-law right now, quadruple open heart surgery, because he said he's been having these pains since April or March. If we treat trauma, if it's just stress, the trauma gets worse. And here's our poster boy who can speak, his life attests to that. So, how much physical change is going on in your life? Emotional change, social, spiritual. And how much of this change meets trauma criteria is your estimation, your judgment. When I use the word spiritual, we're all pretty familiar with physical, emotional, social. By spiritual, I mean your purpose on the planet. I'm not sure my grandpa's dairy cows thought about their purpose, that they wanted a meaningful life while they were on the planet. But we as humans strive to have a meaningful, purposeful life. And when that's threatened, it can be traumatic. So what do you believe? How do you stay healthy? What do you believe about that? What does a fulfilled life look like to you? I don't want to retire on a golf course. That's not fulfilling to me. It's not. I want a meaningful life that I'm going to continue to create, and I know it's going to change each year. I'm almost 75 years old, and I don't know when I'm going to retire, because this is meaningful to me. I'm most probably working out unconsciously a lot of my nephew's suicide. Most probably. You're a good psychiatrist. Do you think that's accurate? Why I'm not retiring? Okay, we now know from brain imaging that trauma changes the synapses, the way our brains neurologically function. We now know that. This is what the brain looked like before the trauma. This is what it looks like now. So I always coach my clients, we might be dealing with something physical here. So I had a client, suicidally depressed, 23 years old, I said, when's the last time you've been to a doctor? I mean, 2 or 3 years ago. I said, how much sunshine do you get? How much dairy do you eat and drink? Neither. I'm a video game man and I work from home. I don't get to go outside much. I said, why don't you go up to Quest, call your doctor, order a blood draw. Guess what? His vitamin D was so low, and low vitamin D creates depression. His vitamin D was so low that he had to go to the doctor's office and get an IV of vitamin D. And this was 5 weeks ago. He's already feeling better. He was dealing with something biological. And we now know from brain imaging that and we'll talk about this in the very near future, nutrition, sleep, exercise affects your brain, how your brain's functioning. Oh, don't be logical with someone you guys know that when you're rescuing somebody out of a car, you can't be reasonable and logical, right? Let me explain to you why you need to get out of your car right now. Can I explain? No. Get out. I'm going to help you get out, but you don't do it reasonably and logically. You take charge and say, this is how we're going to do it. Right? Good. Because when the brain is traumatized, it doesn't think logically. I know if I keep drinking Jack Daniels, a half a bottle a night, I know logically it's going to ruin my marriage, my health, and my career. But I go out and buy another bottle of Jack Daniels. That's why sometimes you need a professional to break that logic apart, because people know they're destroying their life. They logically know that, but they keep doing it. So you got to break that. And that's why some people like Michael take cold baths or cold showers. Cold showers work, folks. It reboots the brain. I end my morning shower, I ended with as cold as I can stand it. I ended. First I soap up with hot. But then I just stand underneath the cold water because it does reboot the brain. And we know that from brain imaging. So to the degree that your identity as a husband, father, son, firefighter, Christian, whatever you claim as your identity, to the degree that that's threatened, that's going to be your trauma. That's going to be your trauma. So many people never identified with their job. It never was a career. So they can't wait to retire and get on the golf course because it never was their identity. It was a job, not a career. When I worked in suicide at the clinic, 80% of all suicides in the United States are completed by white people. What's that about? Within that 80% are males. African and Hispanic women make up less than 4% of all suicides. Together, make up less than 4% of all suicides. What do those statistics tell us? Any sociologists here? Why do white guys die by suicide at an extreme measure more than anybody else? What is that saying? One reason, there's many theories. One is that we so identify with our careers and our roles as father or spouse, and when that's taken away, I got nothing to live for. That's one theory. That a lot of white guys identify wholly with being husband, father, firefighter, whatever, and when that's gone, Mike and I talked down a firefighter this summer whose girlfriend left him. Why would I want to go on living without her? She's my everything. Thankfully, he's safe and doing well today. But you see, if your whole identity is caught up in something and it's taken away from you, especially unexpectedly and traumatically, it can lead to suicide. So 80% of suicides are white people. I don't know. So what roles do you assume, and how meaningful are those roles? Unfortunately, a lot of men don't find being a father meaningful, so they don't assume that role. That's sad. How do you identify yourself? What do you believe about all these roles that you have taken on? Trauma happens when any of these meaningful roles are taken away from you unexpectedly. So, the reason I have rage attacks, the reason I'm crabby, the reason I feel depressed, it's your fault. We pick a person, our spouse, our captain, politics. We blame our emotional health on someone else. I wouldn't be so crabby if it wouldn't be for, and that's called blame. Shame, I'm the problem. It's all about me. And then we get on that seesaw between shaming and blaming, and I deal with this with 90% of the clients who come to me are dealing with blaming or shaming. 9 out of 10. They have someone to blame, or they're ashamed about it themselves. And so they're on the seesaw, back and forth. And so I teach people how to get off the seesaw. Stop shaming and blaming. It's very tiring. It's very tiring. So living with shame and blame, we seek relief. And unfortunately, the relief comes a shot of Jack Daniels, a snort of Coke. Shame and blame are gone. But only for an hour. And then in an hour it comes back. Maybe I should take 2 shots and 2 snorts. Then it stays away for 2 hours. So it's just a Band-Aid, a temporary relief. And unfortunately, we go back to it over and over again, thinking this time it'll work. And it doesn't have that solid relief. So many people find getting off the seesaw through a spiritual, religious experience. St. Augustine said our souls, our lives will not be at peace until they're resting in God. So some people find getting off the shaming and blaming, the resentment through religion, through God. Some. A lot of people don't. Addictive behaviors provide temporary relief. Gradually, more is needed to get the same relief. Eventually, the person, like Michael's father-in-law, says, "You're just a damn old drunk." You see how the shame comes in? Ineffective dealing with trauma can lead to some compulsive behaviors, and now we're just an addict. We're just an old drunk. And now we got a lot of shame to heal. A lot of shame. What's sad is the untreated trauma that led to the addiction isn't acknowledged. And this physician a half hour ago on the phone, he says, "Doc, I cannot figure out. This was a high-achieving high schooler, had a full scholarship to one of the Missouri universities, and he was there for 3 months, and he came home, and he hasn't left the house since. What's going on there?" I said, "I don't know either yet, but we will find out." He, I believe, has a marijuana addiction. He vapes every hour on the hour for the past 2 years. And we know from brain imaging now that you can reach toxic levels of THC that really screws up our thinking and our paranoia and our anxiety. So it's like somebody drinking a shot of bourbon every hour versus somebody who has one mixed drink on a weekend at a barbecue. Someone who smokes pot on a weekend, every other weekend, is very different from somebody who's vaping THC every hour on the hour, which he reports to me. He didn't report to his physician, but he reported to me as what he's doing. So how do we get through all this? I have a 36-year-old pharmaceutical rep, and he came in depressed. I go, "What's going on?" And by the 3rd session, he says, I believe I shouldn't have let Max's death impact me because everybody told me it's just a dog. Get over it. But nobody knew what that dog meant to me. So he started telling me this story, how he rescued him, and what Max meant to him. Nobody acknowledged. And part of his struggle was, maybe everybody else is right. I should just get over it. But then he started telling me about Max and their relationship. I said, oh, it sounds pretty, because Max died very unexpectedly, very suddenly. He was only 6 years old. But he told me all the details about rescuing him, etc. I rescued a three-legged dog that was in the streets. His whole back leg was mangled. I said, come on, get in. The vet cut the leg off at the hip, and the vet did it for free. I go, why? He says, because when I was a 10-year-old boy, I found a dog just like this, and my dad wanted to put him down. I talked him out of it, and that dog was my buddy, and that dog inspired me to be a veterinarian. And because you stopped for this dog, I'm going to do it all for free. No bill. And I had him for 12 years. I'm not supposed to be depressed about X, Y, or Z. Whatever it is in your life. How much shame do you live with? I'm not supposed to let this bother me. But it is bothering you. But I'm ashamed that it's bothering me. Do you see where we paint ourselves into a corner? But it is bothering you. So what beliefs are paralyzing you? If only everybody around me acted differently, I wouldn't have a problem with rage. It's everybody around me that's the problem. So resilience comes from the Latin word resilio, to bounce back. I flip it to bounce forward. The guy who inspired me is Dr. Viktor Frankl, who spent 4 or 5 years in a concentration camp. And he was a physician. He lost his wife and 3 kids, his home, his career during the 1940s in Austria. He said, if I was fixated on everything I lost, my wife, my kids, my home, my job, if I would have stayed fixated on the past, I would have killed myself in the concentration camp. Instead, I imagined what a possible future could be. And he calls that logotherapy. And that's what I base my practice on. How do I help a client build a future that they love? I can't fix the past. I can't change the past. But together we can change and create a better future. And so his therapeutic model is what I really studied hard and in depth, and it really informs how I approach healing. So we can't go back. I believe trauma healing is future focused. And I can report my sister and her husband and 2 other sisters, we all went to an island off the coast of North Carolina where my sister lives, and we had a great time. My sister and her husband are doing really well 18 years later because their whole life was future orientated. So to be resilient means you can manage change. How much change can you manage? You are healthy if your overall functioning at this particular time is working for you. I share this story because it changed my life. When I was on the leukemia floor, a 34-year-old lady came in with 4 children, 12 to 3, and it was her second round. She failed at high-dose chemo the first time. Her bone marrow transplant didn't work, so she's in a second time. And she said, Gary, would you be here tomorrow when my husband comes and visits? I said, why? He's not going to like what I have to say, and I need you to help me. She goes, so her husband came the next day, and she says, John, I have 8 letters here, 2 for each kid. And I wrote them out. One is for the day they graduate from high school, and the second one is on their wedding day, because I want to be there on those 2 days. And I've made a gift list of 8 items that I want you to go out and shop, and together we're going to wrap them. You're giving up. You're giving up. And so we worked through what's the difference between surrendering and giving up. And I have a whole lecture on that. So anyway, her husband was beautiful. He went and bought the gifts. They wrapped them together. 3 weeks later, she died. Fast forward 10 years, the 12-year-old is now 22, and he is a waiter at a restaurant I'm at. I didn't recognize him. But he came up to me. He says, "Are you Gary Behrman?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, I'm Barbara's oldest son." Oh, how could I forget Barbara? And he says, and he didn't use this exact language, but he says, "Thank you for helping my mom to die healthy." Because I said to Barbara, I said, "Barbara, you are one of the healthiest persons I've ever met in my life." She goes, "No one has said that to me since I've had leukemia." I said, "Look at how you parent. Look at the mother you are to those kids. You're such a healthy mother. The way you treat your husband and your guests." I said, "And the many, many conversations we've had, you are so healthy. Your body may not be healthy, but who you are as a person is extremely healthy." So, what is your overall, your physical, your emotional, your social, spiritual health? It may be weak in one area. I had a ruptured appendix, and I got sepsis out of it because like a good guy, like a good man, I sat on my symptoms for 3 days. I thought I had food poisoning because it was here. I literally, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, I went to my doctor's office. He said, "I'm calling Mobap." And luckily, I drove myself, and I fainted when I got into the hospital. 3 hours later, I was in surgery, and I had sepsis. My whole body was infected because I sat on my symptoms for 3 days. Yeah, it's just food poisoning. But my overall optimal functioning for the next 2 weeks, physically, was very low. But spiritually, I felt like God gave me a second pass. Because 80% of people die with sepsis. It's very deadly. So I felt spiritually alive, emotionally. My brother was there. My brother washed my hair for me. It was just a real positive, life-threatening experience for me. So, do you blame your environment or do you blame yourself? Have you ever seen a squirrel in a tree versus a squirrel in a bucket of water? You guys excel when you're on the truck. And you may be awkward in other areas of your life. So give yourself a break that this is my tree. This is where I'm optimal. This is where I function best. But there are buckets of water in my life when I look like a drowned squirrel. We're not always in our tree, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're not functioning well. So let go of resentments. Resentments is getting even. You hurt me, I'm going to hurt you back. That's not healthy. Everybody loses. Anger is, I love you too much for you to keep drinking the way you're drinking. I'm really angry at you. You're really screwing up. And I can't tell you how angry I am with you. That's healthy anger. Resentment, you're hurting me by all the drinking you're doing. I'm taking the kids away from you, and you'll never see those kids again. That's resentment.